And I know last time we talked, you said there's plenty more that we didn't even get to, so I'm hoping maybe tonight we could get to some of that.
No problem.
All right, great. So, floor is yours.
Okay, well, geez, I was born and raised here in San Francisco, California. Went through the public schools. Did a little bit of college prep work at San Mateo College for reserve police officers training, but I couldn't afford the academies. They're rather expensive. I ran for U.S. Congress as a Republican back in 1996, and again back in 1998 against Tom Lantos. Actually did pretty good the first time. I actually pulled over 126,000 votes. I started to go into researching Nibiru and the Anunnaki because of things I was seeing up on YouTube. Some of the YouTube videos back in 2006, 2007, they were showing sky coordinates, and they were showing something really interesting. A lot of these were images that were being shown on worldwide telescope from one company, from Microsoft, and then from Google Earth Sky. Back then, they actually had several nice images that were showing something that just you couldn't see because it looked like someone took a black marker to it, you know, circling around it. And I set the sky coordinates to a friend over in NASA, and he sent me back a really nice DSS image. Now, a DSS image is a image that you would see directly through a telescope. So this image was showing 5 things orbiting around nothing. Now, your listeners probably know that a DSS image cannot show a brown dwarf. Brown dwarfs can only be seen in infrared. And later I got those images. So between that and then accidentally stumbling into NASA recording these massive, now technically all I can say is they are anomalies / UFOs. That's exactly what they call them on the internet. I can call them what I want, and I can call them that they're actually massive motherships coming into our system. NASA has been recording these things and other things since 1998 with their SOHO satellite, which is 4 times the distance away from the Earth of the Moon. So 4 times the distance of the Moon to the Earth's out there in a Lagrange point. These are multi-million-dollar or billion-dollar camera systems. They're not like what you or I would carry in our hand and look up in the sky. Oh, that's a nice white object. That's a UFO. No, these are very good images. And NASA has been cleaning up all the glitches on SOHO up until 2012. And supposedly these things should not be seen anymore.
And don't forget, they just landed some kind of orb of some sort, or
it was a probe.
A probe. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
On an asteroid, I think it was, right? Or
a comet? It was a comet. Way the heck out there. That supposedly took them 10 years to even get there. And that shows how good our technology has come. Either because we did it on our own, which I would like to believe, but I'm sorry, I don't believe all of it. Reverse engineering of the stuff that we have found since Roswell clearly shows that we have other things that make NASA look like little child's play.
Well, Robert, what do you think could be the real reason they're so anxious to land on a comet? Could it be that comet is in the vicinity of what they're trying to see?
I honestly don't know. I would probably be just really super guessing right now, and I really hate doing that with all the stuff that I want your listeners to even try and listen to me about. I'm not going to tell them that they should believe this, but I want to put it in their brains to think about it. You know, so many things are happening. So many things have happened since 1954, 1955 with the Vatican, the Jesuits, Jesuit leaks, a former pope which just resigned, complaining about the Jesuits and their ET agenda, which backs up everything that was leaked in the early 2000s about a high-ranking Jesuit priest telling everything to an Italian reporter. You're just barely touching on everything that's around here, I swear.
Yeah.
So just go ahead and ask me some questions. I'll answer them as best way I can.
All right. Well, I guess I'll ask the obvious question: is where the hell is this thing, and when can we expect it?
Okay, the thing I think you're talking about is Nibiru.
That's correct.
Nibiru orbits around a brown dwarf, which is a companion to our sun. Most star systems have a binary, which means you have two suns of almost the same size. Our sun has at least one brown dwarf, which has up to 7 planets orbiting around it. Nibiru has always been called the planet of the crossing. So if you take this brown dwarf with its 7 planets and its Oort cloud, just like our system has an Oort cloud way out there past Pluto, and Nibiru orbits into and through our system between Jupiter and Mars, that's clearly the planet of the crossing. No ifs, ands, or buts, right there. My opinion, I could be speculating, and a lot of people want me to say, hey, I'm speculating, I don't really know. I've just been researching the holy heck out of this stuff for years, between when was the last time it was here, how it orbits around our system. If any of your listeners can go to YouTube, they can call up Nemesis, Nemesis, our sun's evil twin, and it pops up. It's like a 45-minute video, and it clearly describes everything about how a brown dwarf and its system is much larger than our system, and it orbits around our system.
Well, how do we know any of these people who put out videos or any of that stuff, how do we know that they're right?
Well, the people that are in that video are all well-known scientists. The photographs I have showing the brown dwarf and its 5 inner planets was leaked directly from NASA back during 2007-2008 from the South Pole Telescope, and supposedly that was on its orbit as the whole thing was orbiting around. See, Nibiru. Okay, Dr. Robert S. Harrington used to work for the Naval Institute back there in Washington, D.C. Supposedly, NASA gave him and several other scientists their own groups, and they were to look into this stuff. Because NASA accidentally, on its first try in 1983, found something of a very massive heat signature out beyond Pluto. They said it was between 4 to 8 times the size of our planet, and blah, 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 blah. And they jumped the gun, and they called a news conference. Then 3 days later, they retracted it, saying these guys didn't know what they meant. Blah, blah, blah. Don't listen to them. Well, Dr. Robert Harrington found out enough between 83 and I think 92. And just like in the movie 2012, when the guy from the Louvre is accidentally taken out because he was going to file a news conference, Robert Harrington was about ready to do the exact same thing.
Well, you know, Robert, we see that in a lot of situations. Look at the woman who was in charge of the records in Hawaii. How, you know, it's kind of funny how she goes down in an airplane and gets wiped out when she knew the truth about Obama.
Yeah, I've heard different there's a whole list of famous astronomers who supposedly have been looking into this thing since way back in the 50s, 40s, 60s, 70s, and anytime they started to get really super close, they accidentally died. They had this, they had that. Now, is this to say that the powers that be are taking them out? I don't know.
The powers that be are dark powers, let me tell you that.
Well, yes. I mean, President Truman, back towards the end of World War II and into the last part of his presidency, for one reason or another, he created Majestic 12, a very secret group that would handle anything dealing with aliens or flying saucers. Now, when President Eisenhower, met with 3 alien races in 1954. Now, this has been reported on several different sites. He also had his spiritual advisor, which was then the Bishop of Los Angeles, Francis McIntyre. He had him there at the same time. And Francis McIntyre was so scared after what he saw for 2 days, he refused to be sworn that he would never talk to anyone about this, even God. Bad mistake. He raced all the way over to Rome, told Pope Pius XII that, hey, Pope, look what just happened. They actually had 2 alien races living here on the earth that you couldn't tell from anyone walking down the street. And Pope Pius put an archbishop over him and made a joint venture between the United States and the Vatican. And he actually met with the Anunnaki themselves, just like Eisenhower did in early '55. Pope Pius described them as being a warrior race. Now, what he meant by that, I have no idea, but I mean, if I were to meet, like, say, the ancient Romans, and they've got shields, and the way they talk, the way they act, they were clearly a warrior race, or any of the other beings that lived way back then. So, you know, we've got this stuff, and if you just had to take that on one hand, all right, it's all BS, someone just makes this up. But then this poor guy that actually went there to the same meetings, I think his name was Gerald Light. He actually, after signing everything, swearing this, and that, and he got back home, he wrote to a friend of his. And his letter still exists. His friend died years ago, from what I understand. His wife found it. And I have a copy of that up on my webpage, which is www.starshipsaroundthesun.com. It's right there on my front page where you can actually read it. And this guy just goes into stuff that was not in any book, movie, or story at that time. He talked about the dematerialization of solid objects, and this hand-picked Western team of just the highest scientists that Eisenhower could get. They all looked like they had their jaw on the floor because they'd never seen anything like that. And that never showed up in any story until Star Trek. Well, 10 years later.
Well, yeah, I need to still see that. You know, I've looked for it a few times online, and I end up with some garbage that somebody, title's wrong. But if this thing is, if Nibiru, if Planet X, whatever you guys want to call it, anybody, there's so many names for it. If this thing is
there is.
If it's in our solar system, and I mean it's close enough where it's going to affect us soon. Like, I've had many who've told me it's out somewhere in between Jupiter and Saturn and out that way. And I'm thinking, if it gets anywhere close, even to where, say, Jupiter is from us, then we would be able to see it, because the sunlight, it would then, catch light, just like Jupiter
Exactly. And that is where there's a small problem. All of the ancient documents all said that the people could see a massive red thing in the skies. They could see it. It actually filled the skies from horizon to about halfway up in the skies. Now, if Nibiru is 4 times the size to 8 times the size of our planet, which would make it roughly around the size of Jupiter, that wouldn't do that. Okay? Any of your listeners would say,
well, Jupiter, I think, is about, isn't it like 100 times or more? How many? What do you, Rascal? How many Earths can you fit in Jupiter? I think it's.
I think it's in the thousands.
I thought it was 100 or 1,000. I can't remember. No, I'm going to guess probably about 1,000.
Yes. So, but the people back, and the dates are firmly locked in. The last time it came here was between 1600 BCE and 1558 BCE. It was seen for 9 to 10 days in the Earth's skies over Egypt during the Exodus of the Hebrews from Egypt, with whatever persons the Bible says it was Moses. The ancient Egyptian version from Ippawar says it was a priest prince from the inner courtyard of Pharaoh who led the slaves and evildoers out of Egypt while all this stuff was happening. And in his account, he describes exactly what's in the Bible. Exactly. Except for the all the stones coming down. They destroyed the palace of Pharaoh, which was a Hyksos pharaoh, not an Egyptian pharaoh. The Hyksos ruled Upper Egypt between the 12th dynasty and the end of the 17th Egyptian dynasty.
You know, what if these pyramids actually were designed for certain selected people to survive the apocalypse? What if these were, what if these are like the underground bunkers our governments are doing now? You know, what if it's something like that?
It's hard to say. A lot of scientists have been saying that the pyramids were actually some kind of a power source. Reading Lost Book of Enki by Sitchin, they never mention it in there, but they do mention that these hills were made there in Egypt. They called them hills in the books in the Lost Book of Enki by Sitchin. Now, in the stories from ancient astronauts, there was one show a while back where this one gentleman, he found out that a pyramid shape actually gives off a form of energy that kind of looks pointing skywards. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, we're good.
Well, I was going to say something.
Oh, okay. Rascalo was going to say something. Go ahead.
I was going to share something with you. I've done some research on the pyramids because it intrigues me because I touched a pyramid as a child. I was born in Cairo. I was born in Egypt. And my dad took me out to see the pyramids. And I touched it. And I got a very, very strange feeling. And it was unique because my dad touched it and didn't feel it. But I touched it and it wasn't my imagination. There was a unique energy there. And so I've done some research on them. And I've found that according to one of the documentaries that I read and watched, they did generate electricity. We found that the Nile was actually much, much closer to the pyramids than it is now, that over the centuries it has moved away. But they've also scientists have shown that if you have running water and sunlight, you can generate electricity, and that's exactly what they had. They had running water, sunlight, and then they had probes. If you look at the diagrams of the pyramids, you'll see that the pyramids go down underground as well.
Yes.
But, that portion that went underground had something to do with the generation of electricity. Along with that, it also generated a frequency that would give people, generally speaking, a euphoric feeling. And from what I understand, this feeling or this resonance that went out was over a span of over 40 or 50 miles. So anybody who lived within 40 or 50 miles of the Great Pyramids always had this euphoric feeling. It was almost like being on drugs, where you didn't need to be on drugs because your body can manufacture that drug, and through this resonance, your body's manufacturing that drug.
Yeah, understood. Yeah. Now, what happened during Ipuwer's account was very clear. It was the Egyptian account. He was a highly trained Egyptian scribe, and what he did was he wrote down everything he was told and what he heard. Everything was happening just like as you heard in the Bible. You had the fire from the sky, you had this, you had that, and the same accounts were being told by Ipuwer. Ipuwer also said that as they were leaving Egypt, ash was falling down on them. Okay, so it took 7 days. So Nibiru was in the sky between 9 to 10 days. So it took them 7 days once they were allowed to leave to walk a certain. Actually, since you were born over there, maybe I know I gave Michael a copy of the account from Ipuwer, and he says certain ancient names, and no one has ever gotten back to me saying I know that place. But anyway, ash was falling on them. They said the ground was heaving left and right. When they got up to the saltwater marsh, they were halted by the deep water that was in the marsh. When the Hyksos pharaoh and his troops finally caught up with them, ash was still falling. In fact, it was getting stronger. The only volcano I could research that even had any problems back then was the ancient island of Thera. Now it's called Santorini. During the just before Pharaoh went after them, they said the ground rose underneath the saltwater marsh, allowing the water to drain away. And the priest prince in the inner courtyard of Pharaoh led all the people running across the mud as fast as they could. But a hind-end group stayed behind, and when Pharaoh and his army went after them, they had a very mixed battle right there. IPOR's accounts said they were being slaughtered left and right. Then they were all paused, because as all this was happening, they're hearing the sound of 10,000 trumpets in their ears. Massive sound. But a truly massive sound, a massive roar, even knocked that out of the air. That was Thera exploding. Because not long after that, a massive tsunami came in and ripped up rocks from the water and killed Pharaoh and washed away the Egyptian the chariots and stuff. Now, anyone that's done any research, the chariots were found on the Red Sea bottom about 25 years ago. They're all gold lined, and they date to almost exactly the end of the 17th dynasty, which was when all this happened. Akhmos I became the first Egyptian pharaoh to reunite Upper and Lower Egypt, and after a certain point in time, he created a stela. A stela is a huge stone or granite type block, and it describes everything that Akhmos I had to repair. A lot of things were undermined. If you can believe it, and it's hard to believe in today's thing, this massive, I call it displacement wave, because Thera blew itself apart. It washed over Crete, pushing Knossos' palace about 200 feet to one side. And it went straight down to Egypt, and probably a lot of other areas, but it flooded. It flooded a good part of Egypt. Okay? Now, this was all described in the Tempest Stela of Akhmos I. This stela was found. It was all broken up at one point. They used it to fill up this one cavity area in these the brand new stuff they built. And it was actually copied back during the 1800s, and it has never been looked at. Pardon?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was clearing my throat. Go ahead.
So, in the lost book, in the Tempest Stela of Akhmos I, in Egyptian hieroglyphics, not a translation, but in the hieroglyphics, which are very easy. If you know Egyptian, you can clearly have it translated. He says all this stuff was damaged, blah, blah, blah. And, oh, by the way, the pyramids had collapsed.
Well, I think those pyramids, there's something special about those things because, for one, they're all over the planet. And I think there's a reason for it. I think it has something to do with some kind of chosen people.
It was a power source. It was a power source. The Russians, they have several special built pyramids up in Russia, and as the Russian fighters come anywhere near it, it shows up on their radar screens as a huge force going straight up. Now, as we all know, when there's a lightning strike, the lightning comes down and it looks like it goes completely to the ground. Yeah, but no. The lightning comes up from the ground and meets the lightning bolt coming down.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, what kind of energy source is it? Does it teleport? Or,
let me explain a little bit further.
Okay.
If you're up in space, like the space shuttle that accidentally came apart when it was coming down, you will see massive sprites coming from the top of massive thunderstorms going and discharging straight up into the atmosphere. Okay? Now, about 10, 15 years ago, NASA found out that there's actually what they call a hyperbole or a wormhole that comes from the sun, and it sends energy to each of the planets. This thing hits the Earth, and it either takes energy from the Earth or puts energy into the atmosphere. So, the Anunnaki, or whomever was here a long time ago, they had the ability to use that energy that was being put up from the pyramids up into the atmosphere and from the sun to our own Earth's atmosphere, all that energy that's around our planet. That's my theory, going on what has been told in Ancient Astronauts and what I've been able to research on my own.
Okay, fair enough. We've got a call. We have Ira. Ira, welcome aboard. Thanks for being patient.
Hi, guys. Oh, no problem at all. Riskala, I wanted to say definitely you're right on as far as the energy source, and you too as well, that the pyramids are definitely an energy source. I mean, the Russians actually have done some experiments with using pyramid power as well, with how it changes the emotions and the moods of people that go into them, and even things that they put into those pyramids can sort of change the energy levels of the items that go into it. So
I have a little pyramid here that Sherry and Len sent me. A nice little pyramid. It's got all kinds of metals in it.
Like an orgone kind of pyramid?
Yeah, that's an orgone generator.
Yeah, I made one of those before, and it works really well in our house as well.
Yeah, we use it.
I wanted to play devil's advocate, though, as far as this nibiru thing goes, and kind of maybe put this out and see what your guest thinks about this. Instead of, I kind of take the viewpoint of not necessarily a planet or a sun being involved in the situation, but, well, first off, we're not actually in the Milky Way. We're actually in Sagittarius Galaxy, which is crashing into the Milky Way. Science has announced that quite a few years ago, that the Milky Way is actually not where we originate from, but we're actually from the Sagittarius Galaxy. We're sort of crashing together into each other. And essentially, what we're doing right now is we're going through an area of space that is much more energetically active, that there's a lot more materials, a lot more denseness to it, and that's what's causing the planets and everything around to heat up, to go, heating up. Because the sun has a heliosphere that it's essentially a bubble that surrounds the whole solar system in the Oort cloud. And since we're going through this dense particle field, the sun has kind of compressed that heliosphere downwards to protect itself better, leaving the planets a little bit more exposed than what they once were. And so that could be an explanation as to what is happening planetary-wise right now. Yes, the global warming thing, we're contributing maybe a minuscule percentage towards it, but I'm sorry, your SUVs and the cows farting into the wind are not changing the climate on Mars.
I was just going to say, that's absolutely, that global warming is a big farce. I mean, there's changes happening, but it's got nothing to do with the SUVs or the airplanes or any of that stuff. It's got to do, I know one thing that has to do with it, and that's what we're doing to this planet with the chemtrails and the fracking and the oil spills and the radiation. So, I mean, that's one that's affecting our weather, but there could be another outside force as well.
That's kind of what I'm contending with as well. And that as far as the Nibiru information is concerned, since we are in an active galaxy, essentially, is it possible that perhaps a rogue planetoid at some point did pass through the solar system, and that's the things that were recorded in those previous events, but that it's not actually a second sun that's happening to us or anything like that, but that we're going through this dense place in the galaxy or in the universe, essentially. I kind of wanted to get your feedback on all of that and see what you think of it.
Well, the interesting part on this is that going back to ancient history, two suns have been seen in the sky several different times. Ancient Ipuwer, he called this thing the Destroyer. And nowhere else is the Destroyer being mentioned except in relation to something that was being seen in the skies over the planet. Solon, which was part of, Plato knew him. He went to ancient Egypt and he talked to the ancient Egyptian priests, and they said he was just nothing more than a little child. He didn't know any of the ancient history, and they clearly told him that the Destroyer had been seen in the Egyptian skies, or the Earth skies, many times before, and each time there was basically a geological pole shift. Solon made this very clear, where the sun and the moon and the stars had all changed to different positions all three times.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Now, the ancient account from Ipuwer also says the same thing, and he clearly says that it was the Hebrews. And he clearly wishes that the Egyptians had been friendlier towards them. He calls them the Kebrus, but it's so very close to Hebrews. There's no way around that. He says that in ancient Egyptian history, the Destroyer had caused the suns and stuff to change 3 different times. That the water had come in, swept the land clean, and that all these different things happened. The growing seasons had changed. He said that when the Destroyer was overhead, all the fire that came down destroyed everything that grew. Orchards, vines, everything. and when they tried to replant stuff, the growing seasons had changed. So it threw everything off. Now, what's that got to do with this stuff now? Okay, I have the pictures from NASA clearly showing a brown dwarf and its 5 planets. I have leaked information from NASA showing 6 planets around the brown dwarf from 2009, and showing that Nibiru would be swinging through our system. It showed that it was at least 20 or 25 AUs away at that point. All that information no one wants to talk about. There's an excellent free computer program called astroviewer.com. If you go on there, you can look at all of the planets in our system, really nice. And if you click on Sedna, a dwarf planet as it's being called, and it shows all the orbits, the orbit of Sedna is just tremendous. And just as the scientists were talking in the TV program Nemesis, our sun's evil twin, they show the exact same orbit, where Sedna, and they mention Sedna, and they mention Sedna's immense orbit. Sedna, being possibly the outermost planet of Nemesis, is just way out there. And here's our little tiny system down in one corner of this massive orbit of Sedna. Exactly how our system would look according to the TV program. Now, if you take the other 6 planets and somehow work them in to Sedna's orbit and make Nibiru swing through our system between Jupiter and Mars, you've got it right there. I don't know how to do that. I had a friend years ago try to do it, and he said he had it finished. He was sending it to me, and then someone came to his place and told him, don't ever send it out again. Don't ever talk to him again. And the guy was just scared bleep.
See, I've reached out in the past because I wanted to prove this one way or the other, and I reached out in the past to lots of different astronomy groups, and I've had response from some. Some didn't want to bother with it at all. They thought it was just some big joke. But then there was some who took it on and said that, and they'd get back to me and say there's nothing there. If there was, we'd know about it. But and then I think, well, I don't know who I'm talking to on the other side either. So I'm still at that point where it's like, come on, I just want the smoking gun. I want to say, well, there it is. That's it for sure. And yes, it is heading this way. That's
well, okay. Started writing about how the warlords back around 1600 BC were fighting amongst themselves. He said that something showed up in their skies, causing forest fires and different things around China, and 3 gods came down and allied themselves with one warlord. And to make the other warlords play down, they caused sand to fall from the skies for almost 10 days. Massive heat, massive cold, and all this other stuff, and all the warlords, they were laying on their bellies, okay? That was his account. That goes from about 1600 BC. If you go even further back, you have Emperor Yahoo, Y-A-H-O-U.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, Yahoo.
And he talked about something coming out of the sky from the constellation Ying. I guess they had 2 constellations, one for constellation Yin and Yang, probably the twins. And this thing caused massive forest fires, massive heat, massive cold, and the oceans topped the high mountains of China, just like in the movie 2012. And it took them 13 years to drain the salt water from the high mountain valleys back down to the rivers. And they had to send 4 teams around to even find out where north, south, east, and west was again, because everything had changed in the night sky.
See, and we assumed that back then that they didn't have exactly what's probably going on now. Well, not probably, but what is going on here, like geoengineering and such. And I hear about sand coming out of the sky and things like that, and I wonder, could that have been, ancient chemtrailers or things of that nature?
No, it was probably the dust that was picked up from Egypt and it was being dumped over in China at the same time. Now, to get back to the pyramids, if you read very carefully the Lost Book of Enki, Sitchin wrote that when Marduk was rescued from the main pyramid, as they were going down the grand thing, they were smashing all of these things that were in the slots. Now, I didn't know about those slots until maybe just a couple years ago, where they were saying, God, what are these slots that go up this grand gallery going up? And they were thinking that maybe certain things were being put in there. Lost Book of Enki tells it very clearly. They were technological stuff, and they were all glowing as they went down with Marduk, and they were smashing each one as they went down. That probably was the power system, and they were making other people pay for doing what they did to Marduk, because Marduk was sealed up inside the Great Pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another theory. It's actually in writing. I mean, Sitchin, either he was the best BS artist anyone had ever heard, because he did all these tablets, and in the tablets he said they had energy weapons, they had this, they had that, they had the ability to come from Nibiru straight to our system, although they never told how much time it was, but clearly it wasn't a NASA shuttle they were using. He described all that stuff. And in tablets number 9, number 10, he goes into exact detail as to when they found out that Nibiru's orbit was altered and why it was doing the damage.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you muted on us.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
probably on the right side of our system, because Nibiru comes through clockwise, according to let's see, Robert S. Harrington. He says it had an orbit. He never said it had a ecliptical thing. He said it had an orbit. And the orbit was about 35 to 40 degrees on the ecliptic. And when you look at the orbital ecliptic of Sedna compared to our system, God, it's almost the same. So, they had technology. They had very advanced technology. And if you followed everything they did in the different things, they knew that this stuff was going to bring Nibiru too close to Mars, thereby taking it too close to the Earth. Now, Nibiru was a big planet, and it has its own moons. So are these the moons that were swinging through our system around Nibiru that they actually saw back between 1558 and 1600? I don't know. But Nibiru, its orbit never comes any closer than between Jupiter and Mars. So something was clearly seen every single time something happened. And the ancient Egyptians called the destroyer.
I'll tell you what I want to do. My plan is I want to seriously confuse future people, and so I'm looking to bury some artifacts of some sort. Maybe some wild stories. I want to bury this stuff really good. And hopefully, maybe a couple 100,000 years from now they find it, and who knows? I might be on everybody's wall.
Yeah, I don't know what your other two guests think about this stuff. What I'm saying here, I can only tell what I've researched. My first research had nothing to do with Sitchin or Velikovsky. All of my friends told me, don't even think of reading their stuff. It's all BS. So I did all my research on my own, on the internet, using a time frame between somewhere around 1558, and all of these things just dropped right into place. And then you hear about Eisenhower meeting with 2 alien races and 3 alien races back in 54. And then you hear about Eisenhower meeting with the Anunnaki directly when he went to Holloman Air Force Base in 1955. And then you hear about the leaked information that went in the early 2000s from a high-ranking Jesuit priest to Christopher Barbato, which was handed to his friend Lucas Gantamberlo, which did a 2-hour video with Project Camelot in 2008, and he has a transcript of both tapes. You can sit there and just read it right down. Yes, they knew about Nibiru. Yes, they knew about the brown dwarf star. Yes, they knew about the Anunnaki. They actually met with the Anunnaki. And then you got our former Pope blasting away on German radio saying that the Jesuits are evil and they have an alien agenda. And that the new Pope is going to possibly be the first person to initiate first contact because he wants the Vatican to be superior amongst all the other religions. And it's like, okay. You know, and then here in California, several months ago, we had the tarantulas have their mating season. And its mating season was 2 months in advance than it had ever been done before. They couldn't figure out why the tarantulas were going to go mate, and it was actually exactly 2 months in advance. And then recently, our weather guys out here are saying all the stuff coming across the Pacific is also, again, 2 months in advance. So I'm saying, whoa, hold on here a second. What's changing our seasons all of a sudden, if there is a change?
Well, now that can be associated. I don't want to be, you know, I'm not trying to play devil's advocate, but
sure.
I mean, that some of that could be associated with the weather modification that they've done here. That, I mean, they might have knocked it out of whack. We got psychos in charge, but I mean,
exactly,
that could
exactly. But the ETs have also intervened this time. They didn't do that last time between 1558 and 1600. How do I know that? NASA again. NASA's satellites have been picking up these massive space probes that are orbiting our sun. These things have been orbiting our sun for over 7 years. Now, when you put that into the fact that we have an electrical solar system that's at one level, a level of charge, and if you take the idea of a brown dwarf which has its own system orbiting around our system, so now it's gotten too close to our sun, so our sun now is interacting between it and the brown dwarf, Nemesis, and it's also interacting between the planet Nibiru, which is coming through our system.
So they're dancing.
So you have a large, there's a large interaction there that's causing the highest recorded volcanic activity in human history.
Can I toss something in here as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Just recently, I ran across information actually that the Inuit in Alaska have noticed that the time that the sun is in the sky is different than it ever has been.
Yeah.
The sun is setting in a different location than what it should be, and that it's rising in the spot that it should be, but it's setting in a different spot than it should be. And each year it kind of is at a different degree than what it should.
Yeah.
If it was the precession of the equinox, for instance, the sun would rise in a different area. But what they're noticing is that it's rising in the same area, but setting far off in the distance of what it should be.
I've been reading about that too. I've been following them.
Yeah, I read there was a woman who said, an old woman who said that, you know, the sun would always set right behind her barn or something like that, and it don't no more. And so, you know, I didn't know how much to put into that, but I guess it's something that could certainly be researched. And
right. I mean, if you think about the precession of the equinox, it's going to happen that way, that the sun is going to set in a different spot each day. You know, granted it's by one 1/1000th of a degree each day, but that it should also rise in that 1/1000th of a degree as well. And what they're noticing is that it's actually quickly changing, like radically quickly changing, and that it's still rising in the same area. That shows that something is going on that's different than this precession idea.
And the Inuit, they know, going back out God knows how long, where it sets, where it rises all around the year. So
right.
if it's changed, they know it. I know
what they've also I'm sorry, go ahead.
No,
I was just going to say they've also noticed that the way that the wind blows across the snow shifts it as well. Like normally the snow would be going from north to south, and what they're noticing now is that it's east to west. So it's changing the way that the snow drifts are laying across the ground. They've normally been north to south, and they could find their ways back to their homes, for instance, by following the north-south trails that are made in the snow by the snow blowing, by the drifts. And
Sure.
now they've had to change things because it's actually going east to west. And they've said that they've noticed that much of their weather has changed there because the weather is now coming from the east instead of from the north. And it's much worse because from the east it's getting much more of a turbulence going on.
Right. Now, one thing I want to point out amongst all the things I was talking about, I always mentioned heat and cold. Heat and cold. Have either of you two, or all three of you, have either of you ever read the Colburn?
I
The
have, yes.
hardback version.
I
No.
have, yes.
I've
Okay.
read parts of it. I haven't read it all though. I read the
Okay,
parts that persist that contain about this destroyer.
Okay. Now, the destroyer is mentioned several times around inside the Colburn. The Colburn has various different accounts. One of the accounts was, which actually matches exactly where Lost Book of Enki ended, where Enki went beyond the orders of Enlil and was not supposed to tell anyone about what was the flood that was going to be coming up. He went to Zerasudra, which was the other name for Noah, and the account that's in the Colburn talks about this one person having a dream, which he thought he heard through the reeds of his house, telling him to build an ark, and gave him exact dimensions, and the ark was built exactly the way it was told. And he describes exactly how it was actually 3 decks. It was all in a flat, long, same cubits as mentioned in the Bible. And it was 3 decks. The decks were split right down the center, so it had 6 decks. And on each deck there was a water cistern that was lined inside and out with tar. They were the cisterns. Now, anyone that's ever tried to drink water from cisterns full of tar, you know you can't do it. So, just like in the Book of Enki, they were ballast tanks. He also mentions exactly who went on the ark. And there must have been close to 100 people that were on board that ark, according to the account put in the Colburn. And they said that at the point when they knew it was going to happen, they saw the destroyer show up in the skies. Everything shifted. Stars shifted, moon, sun shifted, and then came the wave. Now, if you follow the Lost Book of Enki, the ark actually submerged. So it was below the water, so it wasn't being battered by riding on top. But at some point, the ark had to surface. Then they said they actually went through an immense time of heat and immense time of cold, which was being felt even inside the ark. Now, as I grew up in the 60s and 70s, I kept hearing about people going up on Mount Ararat, and they were looking for the ark because spy planes had gone over and they took photographs, and several of these people with their teams actually found the ark, but their cameras wouldn't work, or they didn't have their cameras, so they drew what they saw. And right in front of you, you have the drawing of the ark, which will split open, showing 3 decks, and looks and matches the exact account from the Colburn, telling how this thing was built. Now, to get into the heat and cold part, an author years ago, actually 2 authors, they wrote a book.
Hold that thought there, Robert, and we'll pick right back up on it. We've got to take our last break here. Folks,
Okay.
This is Late Night in the Midlands. I'm Michael Vera with my guest, Robert Evans Jr. You could pick up where you left off. Sorry about that.
No problem at all. The problem that's been put down through all of the ancient accounts is that they have a time of intense cold, hot, intense cold. Now, this one book is called Cataclysm, Compelling Evidence of a Cosmic Catastrophe in 9500 BC. Something happened. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no one's talking. I think you're hearing feedback.
Okay. Now something happened to the Earth going back about 12,900 plus minus years ago, where it wiped out Clovis man here in North America, wiped out all of the ancient huge animals like saber-toothed tiger, the mastodons, cave bears, and all this other stuff. And several authors, including these guys, D.S. Allen and J.B. Dallaire. Now, in this one book, they stayed away from every part of religion. They stayed away from Zacharias Sitchin, the Russian guy, I can't remember his name right now, and they have a theory, and it's a long book, and it's very super detailed, that something massive with a tremendous gravitational pull came near the Earth, slowed the Earth down to where the Earth actually stopped rotating, did the damage to the Earth, and then as it was leaving, the Earth started rotating again, but the rotation had changed the other way. And that's how they described this massive heat. See, if you slow down the Earth where it's standing completely still, the air around the Earth is still spinning. So that's where you get the intense heat comes from. And then as the Earth starts to rotate again, everything suddenly cools down. Okay? Now, that's mentioned several times in the Kolbrin. It's mentioned by Ippawur, and it's mentioned by other things I've read, including Velikovsky. Velikovsky also mentions it. So you've got several different people looking at this from different points of view at different times, and they're all saying this is what happened. These two gentlemen, they also say that the ice ripped off of Antarctica, creating a massive wave from Antarctica all the way up around the planet up to the Arctic, rebounding all the way back down, rebounding all the way back up, just like in the book Lost Book of Enki, tablets number 9 and number 10. So either Lost Book of Enki was completely BS and he completely followed all these ancient things and no one caught him doing it, or these two guys here are lying with their book, saying that they found what they called tills. This was the junk that was floating around in the world's oceans that was caught between ancient monuments that still stood, was piled into the back of huge caves that were well above sea level back then. These tills clearly showed, like someone put in a blender, animals, their bones, all the ancient plant life from all over the planet, and the stuff that was found in certain points around where they dug it out of. They couldn't live there. So it was from somewhere else. How did it get up there? They say it was the massive Noah's flood, or this type of flood. No, they don't mention Noah's flood. They say it was this massive thing coming too close to the Earth, causing the Earth to stop. Now, where would all the water come if the Earth stopped rotating? Well, as anyone knows in standard high school or junior high geography and stuff, the Earth is spinning, and because of its spin, most of the world's oceans are puffed out at the equator. Okay, and they stay there because, like a top that's spinning, they're all out there balancing out the planet. Right. So if you suddenly get the Earth to suddenly start to slow down because of something outside of the Earth acting on the Earth, all that water is going to start evening out around the entire planet. So now the water gets far super deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's completely covering almost everything. Just like in the movie 2012, where the waters now are almost at the top of Mount Everest. You know,
yeah, that makes total sense. That absolutely.
And then as the rotation started back up, because as this thing went around it a certain way, it caused the rotation to go the other direction. So as the rotation started to pick up, the water receded back out to where it was supposed to be at the equators. But now, because of tectonic plates doing this or that, it has to settle into different locations where it had never been before, or went back to exactly where it was, and the ground is starting to dry out. Now, anyone who's followed any of the prophets, Nostradamus talks about two suns in the sky, where the Earth lost its gravitational force and then suddenly regained it again, all this different stuff. But there's Mother Shipton. Everyone forgets about her. Supposedly, she wrote all her prophecies before she was burned. She was born just before Nostradamus and died just before him again. Now, other people say, oh no, Bob, you're telling us all a bunch of junk. This other guy from the 1600s did it. Okay, cool. If he actually wrote exactly what Mother Shipton and actually created it all, then he was an extreme prophet. Because at a certain point in her prophecy, she says, for everyone that survives the century through, all of this will happen. And anyone who has researched a geological pole shift or pole shift would understand exactly what she's saying. She's saying that the land that was underneath the oceans is now up above, and everyone has to live on top of what used to be underneath the oceans. The water has shifted to new locations, blah, 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 blah. And then she mentions in there, at a certain point, a silver craft comes to view and spews out men of like unknown. First contact, if you follow the time frame that she has put out. Okay? So we've had a whole bunch of prophecies and stuff. They all came from over 2,000 years ago, and they all supposed to have happened by June 1st, 2013. Not one of the prophecies have come true now. So you can either say they're all BS, or someone has stopped them from happening. Now, there's a doctor that you probably know him, Michael. He's a remote viewer. Courtney Brown.
Uh-huh.
He did a remote viewing thing from 2008 to 2013. In his remote viewing, everyone that was in his team all said that by 2013, June 1st, massive meteorites would have hit the world's oceans, causing massive displacement waves. These displacement waves would have cleaned the Hawaiian Islands. Nothing was left on them. Washington, D.C. was gone. The capital was gone. Sydney, Australia was gone because of all these massive displacement waves. One of the things hit the Indian Ocean, creating a massive wave which washed all the way up to the foothills of Mount Kilimanjaro. That's how massive these waves were. It hasn't happened. Maybe a different time frame it would have happened if you follow Courtney Brown or any of the other time frame type advocates. Everything that should have happened by December 21st, 2012 never happened. But if you go back to the end of the last Aztec world or Mayan world 5,200 years ago, something did happen. National Geographic made it very clear. They did a show years ago talking about pole shifts. And the first guy, don't believe pole shifts. We went up to Svalbard, Norway, which plays a good part in what I'm about ready to say here.
Oh, okay.
And it was thousands and thousands of years ago, and it had to have happened very, very, very slowly. And then the scientist that was at the end of the show said, no, no, no. Down here in the Andes, down here in central area down there, they found a glacier that was retreating, and under its bed they found rooted plants. And these rooted plants were the type that grew during a nice sunny season. And these plants were dated back by the carbon dating back to almost exactly 5,200 years ago, right almost to the exact end of the last Mayan Aztec world. Okay, so something did happen back then. Something happened causing a glacier to suddenly start forming on top of nice summer-type plants. So
we have that happening right now with this polar vortex thing. If you look at the way that the polar vortex looks right now here in America, it forms the almost exact shape of the previous glacier that was here during the last mini ice age, for instance.
And I've been following that. Oh, geez, that thing is swinging through Washington and Oregon, going all the way down to Texas, and it's just something else. Well, okay, cool. That's another point. See, I used one of those type pins you push into a map. I've been following all these hints and glitches and everything with those, and they clearly show that something either was stopped or has been slowed way down because of these massive things that are all around our sun. See, the NASA scientists and all the other scientists all predicted that we would have one massive solar storm after the other, starting in 2012, because this solar season was supposed to have been a massive solar season. Where are all the storms? They're not there. They're all shaking their heads because they don't know what is causing it, supposedly. And that's what leads me to believe that these massive solar probes that have been recorded around our sun for over 7 years, and I've got the images to prove it. You know, just like the massive ships that come into our system on a daily basis.
See, what I don't get though is what's the purpose of ET stopping something like Nibiru from happening to us or something along that, but then at the same time allowing something like Fukushima to happen. And that's where I get stuck with that.
You know, our sun controls, believe it or not, our earthquakes, tectonic movements, controls the volcanic activity on our planet. It controls a lot more than no one wants to tell us it does. And that's why in my opinion, and these things are massive, as I sent you some of the images last time I was on your show, you know, so you can actually look at these things. These things are close to our sun. They look like they have shields around them, and they're massive. They're controlling our sun's output. It's interaction between all of the things I said are coming through, and they're trying to make it not as bad as it did during the last visit. Because back then, a lot of the civilizations were just washed away. The Aztecs and the Mayans, they had to run to the top of their mountains to not be washed away by the sudden rise of ocean water.
But if the sun don't kill you, then the chemtrails and the pollution in our oceans
will. The chemtrails are a different thing, and I thought I went over that last. Probably I didn't.
Well, no,
the chemtrails started way back when. I have a lab report. I never sent it to you. Lab report from 2006, 2007. This lab report worked with samples that were taken from Italy and from Texas. And I have the lab report, and it's very clear, multiple pages, and their hypothesis on this was that the stuff they were picking up was all created.
Oh, yeah.
It was not natural. It was all created, and it would cause what they called more gallons.
It causes a lot more than that. More gallons. It's killing plant life. It's nanobots. We're learning are in some of these chemtrails. And that,
okay. Now go back to the late 70s. The Georgia Guidestones were made by someone from a Rosicrucian type thing. What's on the Georgia Guidestones? On 3 massive stones in every language known around the planet.
Well, now hold on.
There's a basic 10 commandments saying don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that, and never allow the population to go above 500 million again.
Well, I'll tell you something. Last time I had mentioned the Japanese language, and you weren't sure if that was on there or not, and I had double-checked it, and the Japanese language is not on the Georgia Guidestone. So that leads me to wonder if they knew that this Fukushima thing maybe was going to wipe them out.
I don't know. Okay, now go ahead further in time. All the FEMA camps were built around the United States and into southern Canada. All the huge amounts of caskets were being built, and they were buried really close to the FEMA camps. Up until 2013, we were hearing one account after the other, after the other, after the other, of every known agency in the United States government buying massive amounts of ammunition, buying massive amounts of handguns, rifles, whatever. A lot of the police departments were now suddenly buying up used military equipment. Now, I know I have the pictures of it. There were several trainloads of automobile cars. You know, those huge things that are 3 levels. Certain parts of the South were converting those into prison cars, and they had the pictures of them. Okay, from about 2012 and maybe a couple of years before that, I was hearing one story after the other, where people had nightmares. One of my friends living up in Washington, he told me of his girlfriend's massive nightmare she had. She said the entire West Coast was hit by a massive tsunami, and somehow only a few people survived, and they were struggling to survive. Then the helicopters came down, and the helicopters were picking up all the survivors. In her terms, they were taking them to prison camps. Now, this was the time before Barack Obama. She said there was a black American president. We didn't have a black American president at that time. And she had no way of knowing a black American president would be elected. She said that it was called the hiding times because everyone was hiding from the helicopters, all the survivors that had not been picked up by these things and put into prisoner camps, and they were being forced to work. Now, a friend of mine, a friend of my wife's, he was another remote viewer. He wasn't connected with Dr. I forget his name right now. Again, he said that all the cloud, the chemtrails would be affecting all the survivors, and that a certain HARP frequency would activate what's in their bodies and would do certain things to them, and he wouldn't tell me what.
Oh, you know, it's like
so you got the stuff in the bodies, you got the HARP stuff. If these guys are telling me and my wife the truth, the survivors are going to be made to either work or die. The elites, they're all being put down in the dumbs, the deep underground military bases, which actually started up in Norway, which brings Norway into this story here. Norway, Project Camelot was started by this one engineer, a high engineer on the dumbs there in Norway. So I didn't mean to cut you off there, Michael.
Oh, no.
I'm trying to keep everything in my mind.
I just
right
gotta
here.
let you know
and
that
I'm looking at the time too. I'm trying to make it fast. He turned politician, and he outed Norway for building all of the dumbs. Deep underground military bases. The elite will go into all those bases, and the other people have to survive on their own because Nibiru was coming. Okay? Mm-hmm. He said it even back then. And that was exactly why the Doomsday Seed Vault was built there in Svalbard, Norway. Because if you remember going back to 1558 to 1600, fire from the sky burned everything that grew, wiping everything out that grew, and then the seasons changed. That's why the Seed Vault and every other seed vault that has not been touched by the news media around planets were built. The Doomsday Seed Vault only hit the news because the builders of the Seed Vault was and is still a who's who of the billionaires around the planet. Just like the billionaires who bought their ARC tickets in movie 2012, they're from Rockefeller, Bill Gates, all the way down. They paid for the Svalbard Seed Vault. See, all these little things and other things, one pin after the other, following something that's supposed to be happening. All the ammunition that was bought by all the the agencies, clearly on the internet, clearly on the news, clearly in multiple articles about it, they knew something was supposed to have happened by 2013. Nothing happened.
Well, then we could be off too.
Yeah, there was a lady. She was a YouTube type person. Her name was Just Call Me Kit. She did a radio show back in 2012 where she was following all of the federal contracts. The federal contracts were pulling everything away from all of our coastlines.
We are out of time, Robert. So
I'm sorry about that. Yeah.
Oh, it's quite all right. We are going to have to do some more shows. That's all there is to it. So I appreciate you putting up with the rush here, but yeah, we're out of time. So anything you want to get out there in the last minute, please go ahead and do it quickly.
Keep your eyes and ears open. Follow your news media type stuff. Listen to what they're saying about this thing is happening too soon. This thing is happening too soon. You know, little hints are being dropped. They're being leaked all over the place. The Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, that's a bloodline. No ifs, ands, or buts to me. The Grail, the Holy Grail was a bloodline from the Anunnaki on down.
All right, Robert. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining me tonight. We're going to have to do this again real soon. And I know last time we talked, you said there's plenty more that we didn't even get to, so I'm hoping maybe tonight we can get to some of that.
No problem.
All right, great. So, floor is yours.
Okay, well, geez, I was born and raised here in San Francisco, California. Went through the public schools. Did a little bit of college prep work at the San Mateo College for reserve police officers training, but I couldn't afford the academies. They're rather expensive. I ran for U.S. Congress as a Republican back in 1996, and again back in 1998 against Tom Lantos. Actually did pretty good the first time. I actually pulled over 126,000 votes. I started to go into researching Nibiru and the Anunnaki because of things I was seeing up on YouTube. Some of the YouTube videos back in 2006, 2007, they were showing sky coordinates, and they were showing something really interesting. A lot of these were images that were being shown on worldwide telescope from one company, from Microsoft, and then from Google Earth Sky. Back then, they actually had several nice images that were showing something that just you couldn't see because it looked like someone took a black marker to it, you know, circling around it. And I set the sky coordinates to a friend over in NASA, and he sent me back a really nice DSS image. Now, a DSS image is a image that you would see directly through a telescope. So this image was showing 5 things orbiting around nothing. Now, your listeners probably know that a DSS image cannot show a brown dwarf. Brown dwarfs can only be seen in infrared. And later I got those images. So between that and then accidentally stumbling into NASA recording these massive, now technically all I can say is they are anomalies / UFOs. That's exactly what they call them on the internet. I can call them what I want, and I can call them that they're actually massive motherships coming into our system. NASA has been recording these things and other things since 1998 with their SOHO satellite, which is 4 times the distance away from the Earth of the Moon. So 4 times the distance of the Moon to the Earth's out there in a Lagrange point. These are multi-million-dollar or billion-dollar camera systems. They're not like what you or I would carry in our hand and look up in the sky. Oh, that's a nice white object. That's a UFO. No, these are very good images. And NASA has been cleaning up all the glitches on SOHO up until 2012. And supposedly these things should not be seen anymore.
And don't forget, they just landed some kind of orb of some sort, or
it was a probe.
A probe. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
On an asteroid, I think it was, right? Or
a comet? It was a comet. Way the heck out there. That supposedly took them 10 years to even get there. And that shows how good our technology has come, either because we did it on our own, which I would like to believe, but I'm sorry, I don't believe all of it. Reverse engineering of the stuff that we have found since Roswell clearly shows that we have other things that make NASA look like little child's play.
Well, Robert, what do you think could be the real reason they're so anxious to land on a comet? Could it be that comet is in the vicinity of what they're trying to see?
I honestly don't know. I would probably be just really super guessing right now, and I really hate doing that with all the stuff that I want your listeners to even try and listen to me about. I'm not going to tell them that they should believe this, but I want to put it in their brains to think about it. You know, so many things are happening. So many things have happened since 1954, 1955 with the Vatican, the Jesuits, Jesuit leaks, a former pope which just resigned complaining about the Jesuits and their ET agenda, which backs up everything that was leaked in the early 2000s about a high-ranking Jesuit priest telling everything to an Italian reporter. You're just barely touching on everything that's around here, I swear.
Yeah.
So just go ahead and ask me some questions. I'll answer them as best way I can.
All right. Well, I guess I'll ask the obvious question: is where the hell is this thing, and when can we expect it?
Okay, the thing I think you're talking about is Nibiru.
That's correct.
Nibiru orbits around a brown dwarf, which is a companion to our sun. Most star systems have a binary, which means you have two suns of almost the same size. Our sun has at least one brown dwarf, which has up to 7 planets orbiting around it. Nibiru has always been called the planet of the crossing. So if you take this brown dwarf with its 7 planets and its Oort cloud, just like our system has an Oort cloud way out there past Pluto, and Nibiru orbits into and through our system between Jupiter and Mars, that's clearly the planet of the crossing. No ifs, ands, or buts, right there. My opinion, I could be speculating, and a lot of people want me to say, hey, I'm speculating, I don't really know. I've just been researching the holy heck out of this stuff for years, between when was the last time it was here, how it orbits around our system. If any of your listeners can go to YouTube, they can call up Nemesis, Nemesis, our sun's evil twin, and it pops up. It's like a 45-minute video, and it clearly describes everything about how a brown dwarf and its system is much larger than our system, and it orbits around our system.
Well, how do we know any of these people who put out videos or any of that stuff, how do we know that they're right?
Well, the people that are in that video are all well-known scientists. The photographs I have showing the brown dwarf and its 5 inner planets was leaked directly from NASA back during 2007-2008 from the South Pole Telescope, and supposedly that was on its orbit as the whole thing was orbiting around. See, Nibiru. Okay, Dr. Robert S. Harrington used to work for the Naval Institute back there in Washington, D.C. Supposedly, NASA gave him and several other scientists their own groups, and they were to look into this stuff. Because NASA accidentally, on its first try in 1983, found something of a very massive heat signature out beyond Pluto. They said it was between 4 to 8 times the size of our planet, and blah, 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 blah. And they jumped the gun, and they called a news conference. Then 3 days later, they retracted it, saying these guys didn't know what they meant. Blah, blah, blah. Don't listen to them. Well, Dr. Robert Harrington found out enough between 83 and I think 92. And just like in the movie 2012, when the guy from the Louvre is accidentally taken out because he was going to file a news conference, Robert Harrington was about ready to do the exact same thing.
Well, you know, Robert, we see that in a lot of situations. Look at the woman who was in charge of the records in Hawaii. How, you know, it's kind of funny how she goes down in an airplane and gets wiped out when she knew the truth about Obama.
Yeah, I've heard different there's a whole list of famous astronomers who supposedly have been looking into this thing since way back in the 50s, 40s, 60s, 70s, and anytime they started to get really super close, they accidentally died. They had this, they had that. Now, is this to say that the powers that be are taking them out? I don't know.
The powers that be are dark powers, let me tell you that.
Well, yes. I mean, President Truman, back towards the end of World War II and into the last part of his presidency, for one reason or another, he created Majestic 12, a very secret group that would handle anything dealing with aliens or flying saucers. Now, when President Eisenhower, met with 3 alien races in 1954, now this has been reported on several different sites. He also had his spiritual advisor, which was then the Bishop of Los Angeles, Francis McIntyre. He had him there at the same time. And Francis McIntyre was so scared after what he saw for 2 days, he refused to be sworn that he would never talk to anyone about this, even God. Bad mistake. He raced all the way over